Hello everyone. I have no idea what I'm doing. Today's video is my first, and I'm going to be focused on just a brief introduction. My name is Rocky Hanish. I am a designer in training to be an architect. I'm a Phoenix native, born in Minneapolis, raised in Phoenix, and I thought I would start a YouTube channel just for various reasons. First being that I have an interest in a couple intersecting topics that I thought I could, for lack of a better term, kind of work out in video format and kind of think out loud. So the topics are architecture, urbanism, a little bit of theory, some philosophy, technology, and the intersecting ways in which those things result in not just how we think about architecture as a society perhaps, but also ways we think about things like representation. For those of you who aren't architects, that's more of like the way we represent a building. As architects, we don't make buildings, we draw buildings. So there's an important distinction to be drawn there, literally and figuratively. And it's also about cities. I think everywhere in the US, we think about the places we live, we care deeply about the places we live, and we want them to be beautiful, safe, growing, prosperous places. And so that's kind of the entry point into my videos. I'm not really sure where this will go. We'll kind of see what happens. Mostly I'm interested in the kind of tangential relationship that philosophy has with architecture in some way, both being a means of how we think about architecture, how we think about thinking, and my cat is scratching the scratch pad as she does, but also how we think about potentially attention itself in the digital age. I'm a bit of a nerd and I have a typewriter. Maybe I'm a nostalgic nerd or something. The reason I bought a typewriter is to kind of slow down in the process of writing. I'm also interested in writing as another kind of tangent on that circle. So I'd like to begin with just a brief kind of introduction. Again, Rocky Hanish, Phoenix native. I have 3 brothers. My mother lives here in Phoenix as well. My brothers all live here in Phoenix. I have lots of close family and friends, and lots of people who support me in my career. And shout out to all of you who help me get through the day. I've had challenges in my life related to mental health. I've had challenges related to relationships. I've had challenges related to my career. And in some ways, this video or series of videos is a way of thinking out loud about some of these topics as related to the places we live in and how we see them affecting our daily lives. So I don't know how much this will take off as a format. I have no expectations. But I do think it's pretty interesting to think about culture as related to architecture as well. I don't think there's a famous author known in architectural kind of theory and history circles who spoke about the idea that Americans as a generalized culture, and I'm not trying to generalize about everybody, don't really recognize or notice our environments as much as some other cultures. And that's not so much a critique as something that's a little bit true. I even find myself lacking in awareness at times in the built environment. In my view, this has largely to do with the fact that we move very quickly through our environments, for example, in automobiles. One of my favorite quotes is goes along the lines of something like, one of the best ways to go slowly is to walk. And so I think it's really interesting to think about walkability as related to urbanism, as related to theory. I think walking helps us think. I think when we are able to slow down and walk, we're much more connected to our environments. I like to say, this quote unquote, I don't know where it came from or if I came up with it, I have no idea, that we evolved to walk at a certain speed, and that is interesting. Our bodies and the size of our bodies are of a certain scale. We exist in an environment that reflects that human scale. And so I think it's interesting to think about not just objects of attention or affection, let's say, in terms of how we think about daily objects, whether it's, a phone or a box of chocolates or, a pen or something. All these objects are built, scaled, designed to interact with humans. Now that might seem obvious, but it isn't entirely obvious, actually. It's interesting to think about in architectural terms, because scale is a huge architectural, let's call it theme or topic, related to how we think about and unpack space, how we draw space, how we unfold or refold or whatever architectural language you want to kind of imbue to think about how architecture comes into being. I'll be talking about that as well, about drawing, about methods that we represent things both in digital terms and maybe even in haptic or analog terms. Excuse me. So that's kind of a very broad introduction, very broad way to get started, but those are some of my interests. The scalar question, the question of scale, is related to the whole Earth in some way, right? It's like almost like this seeming dichotomy between what we might refer to as the global idea and the local idea. I think in a lot of ways these two ideas seem opposed to each other in many circles. I'd like to argue that they're very much connected, and connected in a way that is sometimes mysterious, and that's okay. For example, I have a little courtyard out here. You can see our garden. So that's a local condition of my backyard. And I'm talking to you on an internet, which is in fact entirely global in some respects, right? So that's what I mean. We have local conditions and we have global conditions. And balancing those things is just fundamentally interesting to me. In a day and age where we move so rapidly through content, where we move so rapidly through flipping through videos, I do it myself, right? We're kind of looking for some meaningful experience. What is meaningful about media, maybe related to perhaps someone, media theorist like Marshall McLuhan, or maybe that's starting out at too advanced a level. Maybe it's just an entry point of how do we experience something? What is our experience of someone else, maybe who's different from us or the same as us or whatever, or someone who's from our family or someone who's a friend or someone who's a complete stranger or a neighbor, right? I, in this format, don't really have a sense of who I'm talking to. I don't have a target audience. I don't have necessarily a particular agenda other than kind of talking about architecture, which is why I've titled this channel kind of the idea of architecture and thinking, or framing it around thinking and architecture. So, there's a lot of different ways in which theory is irrelevant to architecture, actually. We could start there as a point. There are questions in theoretical and philosophical discussions that have very little to do with architecture. But that's also tangentially not entirely true. There are a lot of epistemological, what you might refer to as epistemological, and I'll define terms as I go in these videos as I get better at this. Epistemological means the kind of root cause, or not maybe root cause, but root definition or root origin of an idea. In kind of my experience or my view, the definition might be slightly different in some people's experience. And so, what is the root cause of architecture? Well, it's actually a pretty fascinating idea. Is that we need shelter from the environment, potentially, right? Unless we live somewhere where it's such a paradise that we can just live in a hut by the beach, which sounds amazing, right? I live in a desert. I live in a desert city, Phoenix, Arizona. And so the idea of shelter is very much related to a few things: staying cool, being secure in your home environment. And now I am having a thumbs up from Siri. Thank you very, very much, Siri. The idea of creating a space where you can be yourself, where you can think. Those are all things that we think about, I think, in a desert context. How do we see identity or place as relative to where we live? But it's not entirely about identity. It's also about our reflexive connections in our community, to do with, do you know your neighbors? Is there a way that you can connect with your neighbors easily? How do we connect with others in space? Is it through events? Is it through thinking about sending a message to someone? Is that how we connect now? I think that's largely true. It's become true. The tendency for that process is to perhaps overly privatize that process, whereas public space, in some kind of definition that I'm creating, might suffer. And I think that's especially true of a city like Phoenix. The word Phoenix, it's the story of the bird, the phoenix, rises from the ashes. Phoenix has this kind of narrative and energy around renewal, the idea that we constantly reinvent ourselves. And I think that's such a productive and beautiful idea. And I want to talk about it, and I will in subsequent videos more. So if you have any comments, if you have any suggestions, or if you have any things you'd like me to talk about, I'm kind of happy to entertain them. I really want to see this video process as generating a means of discussion. And so it's not so much about me lecturing something. I'd like input and feedback. So if you want to leave comments, if you feel like you have something to add that's of value, and not something that's nasty, I would prefer that you add it. Now, there are, I'm 38 years old. I'm old enough to have experienced somewhat of a pre-internet age, and it's interesting to me to think about how these ideas link through history as well. Architecture has this longevity to it, right? It's one of the most energy intensive, one of the largest scale, and one of the most expensive things that humans do on Earth. And so from a climactic perspective, from an environmental perspective, there's also very important aspects of why should we be interested in architecture at all? I want to really talk about that as well. So first video, thumbs up from Siri. Maybe she'll do this again. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, there she goes. And thank you for joining me, and I hope to continue this journey with you, kind of working through and thinking and talking about architecture in whatever way seems organic. Thanks for joining.